Hi and welcome. As you know, I like to start ish on time, but I wanted to give folks 2 minutes to sign in and get their feet planted. I just want to actually, Yen, I'd love for you to introduce yourself because you know yourself better than I do. So will you do a quick intro and then
Here's to hoping that I do. So I am Yanadira Méndez-Magaña. I am originally from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I currently live in Dallas. I have been working in education for about 5 or 6 years and in the college access space. I currently work at a charter organization in Dallas that serves predominantly low income first generation students. And really my passions lie with working with these specific populations as well as with LGBTQ youth. I just I have little LGBTQ groups at all of our different high schools and work with a lot of our students and do a lot of advocacy on the side. But yeah, I'm so grateful for you guys to be here, and I'm so grateful, Ethan, that you asked me to do this. So
I'm glad we get to do it again. So hi everybody, I'm Ethan. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am college essay guy. And I am like I just want to kind of play, host kind of like for Yen. Yen's going to take the first 20, 25 minutes and talk kind of big picture about a lot of different things and a resource that we collaborated on for a conference that we presented at last year, and we presented on this last week for a different conference. And then you're gonna kick it over to me, and I'll talk about essays, and then we'll do Q&A. If you've got questions along the way, feel free to throw them in the chat box, and there's a little button next to it that you can like mark it as a question. That makes it easier when we're skimming through things at the end. So we'll do like 20 to 25 minutes with Yen, 20 minutes with me, and then Q&A for like 10. Sound good? Cool. All right. You share screen, do all the things, and
yes.
Go ahead.
All righty. So I am gonna share here. So let's present. Cool. So like I said, Yanadira here, she, her, hers. I didn't say that from the beginning, and so I apologize for that. And so I want to kind of say a few things. A lot of this work is very, very important to me. I do identify as a queer professional, and I am a daughter of immigrants. So I have a lot of different experiences, and a lot of the students, I'm very grateful for them to be able to share. So it's kind of a mixture of all of these research pieces and all of these personal experiences. So hopefully both all of you that tuning in can find something to take home with you. And so I do want to get started first though with a trigger warning. So I will be talking a little bit about depression, anxiety, risk of homelessness, and there are some mentions of violence. And so we're not going to talk too much about it, but I do want to be mindful of that for you all. And I think it's so important that when we enter this space, or if you are new to this space, for you to kind of get an idea of who are some of the icons and some of the game changers that really made it possible for people like myself to have rights. And a lot of I really think Illinois is one of the few states that has queer history, LGBTQ history in actual curriculum. But one way that I found to be very proud of where I am today is by all of the work that so many people did to make it possible for me to live the life that I live right now. And so it's very important for me to just kind of set the scene there. One thing that I always tell my students, and that I always tell anybody who I talk to, is that language is constantly evolving. And when you're someone new that's coming to the space and you hear LGBTQ, and then you realize there are so many more words to define gender expression and sexuality, it's constantly evolving. And to just be a patient person coming into this space, patient with the people who are being open with you about their identities, but also patient with yourself as you're learning. And so there's no one way to be a queer person. There's no one right way to live your life. And every experience is going to look very different based on how you, the environment in, both, you know, in terms of family and educationally. So, and it's not a race. So, you know, a lot of times when you're exploring your sexuality and your gender expression, and it can feel like you're so ready to become the truest version of yourself that you are just rushing to get to that because you have just this taste of freedom to feel like who you really are, and just know that it's okay to be exploring those different pieces at your own pace when you're ready, and you don't have, it's not a race to get to a certain point. So definitely want to start the conversation in that way. So we're gonna begin with a little bit of the high school part and some statistics, some intersectionality, and finding your advocates. We'll hit the application and the college search process later in the presentation, but I think it's really important to not feel isolated, especially when you're feeling a little bit down. And so here we can see that, you know, based on the HRC 2018 report, about 70% of queer youth experienced feelings of worthlessness in the last week. So there's definitely some anxiety with either living your truth and being out, or even feeling closeted, or just, you know, it's a reality. Depression is very prevalent within our community. About 24% of students always felt safe in their classroom setting, which is really crazy. When, you know, I read this report, it actually, you know, it brought back a lot of feelings that I had suppressed when I was a student. And then only 5% of LGBTQ youth can say that all of their teachers and staff at their school are supportive of the LGBTQ community.
I want to give a quick shout out to Zachary George, our presenter from, you know, who helped us put some of this together, who helped bring some of this info, and Brad Ward, who was such an awesome part of helping us put together this original presentation. So just a quick shout out. Okay, I'm done.
No, yeah, you know, when we were pulling all of these resources together, I knew we were going to come, you know, it was really important to chat about the reality of what our students are facing. And so I'm really very grateful that we were able to kind of put this together. So thanks, Ethan. Yeah, and then some pieces about the policies when it comes to universities. Only 24% of LGBTQ only 24% of universities and colleges have policies in place to protect LGBTQ students. So even when they leave us, and when we think, you know, college is going to be a dream and like it's going to be the time of your life, for LGBTQ youth, if you're not in a place that protects you, like that might not be the reality. So it's really important that when you're building a college list or helping a student build a college list, that you're making sure that the schools have policies in place to protect those students. Now, when we're thinking about intersectionality, right, where we're at the intersection of our identities, like myself, you know, being a woman, being a queer woman of color, different layers add different challenges to the different parts of your identity. So when we're looking at trans and gender expansive youth, 50% of students said that they've had bathrooms that they felt comfortable using. Yeah, only 50%. And then when we look at youth of color, it is about 11% of youth of color felt that their racial or ethnic group was regarded positively by society. So I think it's really, really important to talk about the intersectionality piece and the experiences of people of color, you know, especially within the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of our discrimination policies and a lot of the way that the LGBTQ community gets discriminated against, all of those is based on the foundation of the treatment of Black people within the United States. So when you dismantle racism, when you dismantle discrimination policies and practices for the Black community, you really break and dismantle discrimination within all other subsets and all other communities, because all of them were built off of the backs of the treatment of Black people within the United States. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about LGBTQ youth, and if they are lying within those intersecting communities, they're going to be experiencing several other pieces that you're not even seeing. And especially within the United States, a lot of our spaces have been created to tailor to white queer experiences or just white experiences. So. And I say that because a lot of times when I was coming out, it was a really difficult process because I didn't know other queer Latinx people, you know, and a lot of times within families and within generational within generational patterns, you might have different cultural expectations, and even though political pieces are evolving. You can take my family as a very clear example. They're very, very Catholic, and always voting very left politicians. So always very liberal, politically speaking. But then when we look at our cultural, the cultural weight of our Catholicism, when I came out, it was a very, very difficult process. And it was very difficult for my parents to come to terms with that. It took about 8 years for them to acknowledge it at all. And so if you're experiencing that, you're not alone in those experiences. And a lot of times when you look at families, like, you know, there's a lot of anti-gay sentiment within Black communities, within Latinx communities. When people come out, a lot of times they get to a point where, wow, they have the knowledge, right? They have the knowledge that I'm queer. That means I can live my life freely. I can love who I love. And that's not really the case. A lot of times we are constantly re-traumatized, re-closeted. We are asked to hide ourselves from the family, the greater family at family functions, from our grandparents. And the trauma just keeps coming back and coming back. And so when you're working with these populations, it's really important to understand that if a student is coming out to you, that you kind of understand that, you know, have a full conversation with them, ask them what their family life is like, and really understand what their whole experience is. Because just because you have one student that's out to her whole family and is accepted, it doesn't mean that that's the case for all of the students. And it's really great to get the whole picture. And then within Asian American communities, or Asian communities in general, and within Latinx families, you see a lot of familismo, which is the concept of valuing self, which is the concept of valuing your family over yourself. And I don't know if anybody has seen the show Love, Victor, which is a spinoff of Love, Simon, the movie, but Love, Victor is a great, like, example of familismo, right? Like, you are exploring your sexuality, your queer identity, but at the same time, you're putting that aside to support the family in different ways, even though, you know, your parents love you and you're having, it's just, you know, family is the most important thing. And that's what we're taught in our cultures. And so if you think that you are alone in that sentiment, you're not. And if you are a white queer person and you have queer friends that are from different racial and ethnic communities, you know, try to be very mindful of where they're coming from, and that they're not going to just be able to come out, and they're not just going to be able to bring their partner around and transition immediately. Like, it's going to be a longer process for them. It might even be, you know, continuously painful, whereas you might not experience the same pieces. So I had a lot of challenge with that within my queer community and my queer friend group. I was one of the only Latinx people, so it was really challenging to feel like I was understood even within my chosen family. So as you're finding your advocates, as a student, I know that sometimes it's very difficult to figure out who are the right people to come out to in this process. But if you're a counselor, make sure to include all of these visuals. So especially in a virtual setting, make sure that in your background, you know, I just moved, so I don't have anything up right now in my new place. But if you are in an office space that you created, make sure you have LGBTQ things in the background. Make sure that you have your pronouns within your screen sharing or your Zoom accounts next to your names. Make sure that if you have served different queer populations, that you have different queer resources. So one really great resource is right here, the Zona Libre de Odio. It's an indicator that if you're coming from a different culture, like there's also different resources for different backgrounds. It's definitely not a one size fits all. And so not only having pride flags or these pieces as a counselor, but making sure you have visibility of different letters within your, you know, have a bisexuality flag, you know, have a trans flag, have a, you know, ace flag, you know, again, not one size fits all. And a lot of times we have a lot of in the LGBTQ communities that are not represented in media. They don't see themselves at all. And so sometimes they're even asking themselves, like, is this even am I even actually queer? I don't know, because I don't see myself anywhere. So definitely be mindful of your indicators. As far as pronouns, add them to your email signature, because small changes, big impact. As a queer student, I would always look for the pronouns, as my students are always looking for pronouns on when they're researching colleges and different people on those colleges and universities. So make it easy for students to locate those things. If your school uses Naviance to capture your data, send it to colleges, there is a nickname piece. So if you don't want your, if you're a student who is transitioning or have a gender non-binary name, and you know you don't want to use your dead name, there is a nickname portion here where you can add a different name, and it changes it up on the Naviance. And so utilize Naviance, ask your counselor, ask your students if they have another name, you know, that they want to use throughout this process. You can easily do that in Naviance. Now, through the college search process, it's like a completely whole new world, right? Like if you're exploring all these things, you can be who you want to be in college. It's this dreamscape, like it's an exciting process, the opportunity to be able to do that. But I want you to kind of do a check-in personally as a student, and ask certain questions before you start coming out to people in the process. So a few questions that I definitely want you to ask yourself as you are applying to colleges, and counselors, if you are working with students, to ask your students, like, who are you out to? And who are you willing to come out to throughout this process? Do your parents know? You know, sometimes it might be just a small few set of people. And so you want to be very mindful of that. For those who are gender non-binary or trans, if they are coming out to you as a counselor, definitely ask them, how would you like me to address you in front of your family or in front of your friends? It's very, very, very important that when a student comes out to you, that you kind of try and get the whole picture of who they're out to, because you do not want to accidentally out them to their parents. And again, as a student, giving the most information that you're comfortable with in that moment helps someone be an even better advocate and ally to you. So as you're building your college list as well, how important is it for you for a school to have LGBTQ diversity and resources for you? How important is it for a school to have ethnic and racial diversity on top of LGBTQ diversity? You know, you don't really think about these things right now, but in those experiences, you know, when I was in college, I went to a wonderful place that allowed me to be a queer out individual. But when I would go visit my partner at her institution across the road, we definitely had a lot of moments where we experienced violence. And, you know, when she was looking for a college or university, she did not prioritize LGBTQ resources and community. So that school definitely didn't have a lot of places where we could feel safe when I would go to her campus. So it definitely can influence your experience at a school. You would think that, you know, in 2020 we would be with the times, but a lot of people, you know, are very not about the times. So it's very important to kind of assess all of that before building your college list.
Right.
And if, as you're coming out, I want you to think about these 3 very, very important questions. I know that it's so hard, so hard to not live your truth. It is like a prison. And so when you are feeling so depressed because you cannot live your reality of who you want to be, you want to come out and just be out and just risk it all. And I want you to think about these 3 questions before you do that, especially if you are still financially dependent on your family to help you make it through college, you know, if you, or you have somewhere to go. So are you financially independent, or could you be financially independent? I think it's very important to have some money saved up. That way, if anything were to happen, you would have some sort of safety net for yourself. Will you be, or are you physically safe? There's a reason why gay panic was used in courts when there was a lot of violence towards queer people, you know, because courts found it legal to be able to, you know, kill people in our community to, you know, just because they panicked because we're queer, and that was an acceptable defense, gay panic. So I want you to ask yourself, will you be physically safe? Yeah, I cannot stress that enough. And will you have somewhere to live if you are kicked out? You know, I think a lot of times parents, I'm not a parent, so I cannot speak to that experience. I can only speak to the experience of being a daughter. And I think, you know, when I came out to my dad, there was a lot of panic from him. And I will never know if he really truly considered it, or if in that moment he just reacted. But finding a place to live and being financially independent was going to be a very real part of my reality when I came out, when I was in college. And I would have never expected that, especially because family comes first. Family's everything. But when you're in that situation, and you just never know. And so I was very privileged that, you know, my mom stepped in, and, you know, they had a very real conversation, and I wasn't financially cut off, and I didn't have to experience homelessness. So, but that is a reality. So please think about this and ask people, can I crash on your couch if I come out to my parents and they kick me out? Like, ask those questions of your friends, and, you know, definitely prepare, because I've seen it happen. I have so many students that have reached out to me several times throughout the course of the year to just ask for some help with finding ways to, you know, live.
I just want a quick side note that this is such a great reminder to me as a counselor who is in California, where things are like relatively cool and like chill. And it's like, yeah, you can come out, it's fine. But this is what students are dealing with still all over. And so this is just an awesome reminder. So I'm just grateful. Thank you. And a friendly time check. We got like 5-ish minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, when you're visiting campuses, definitely look for resources everywhere. Should not just be located in only the LGBTQ resource center. Like, it should be everywhere. That's how you can kind of tell how inclusive the community is for LGBTQ students. Also think about, you know, like I mentioned before, your campus climate, different types of student organizations and policies. I'm going to go through a few ways that you can look up those policies. and resources that your campus offers. And I'll go through a few ways to look that up as well. So if you're still kind of in this, I don't know where to start, I would recommend checking out this campus visit scorecard. It helps you figure out what is the most important piece of the college experience for you. And it helps it when you look at all of your schools with the same lens. Like, housing is going to be the most important piece, so I'm going to weigh that the most heavily. And I'm going to look at the same thing on each campus. So if you're building your college list and you really don't know how to go about it, I would definitely recommend this scorecard, or just a scorecard in general. And if you're a student who is trans, or you're working with trans students, I would definitely recommend going to the Pride Index and looking at the Trans Policy Clearinghouse, which allows you to explore schools that offer different resources, like gender affirming surgeries, like healthcare, mental health pieces. If they just have inclusive sporting and athletic policies. If you go to the Trans Policy Clearinghouse on the Pride Index, you'll be able to go state by state and see which states have policies in place to protect trans students. And if you're just a queer student that does not identify as trans, that will be really helpful for you to see a community that supports the trans policy is definitely going to support students of all of the LGBTQ letters. So definitely check that out. It's constantly updated by Dr. Jenny Beeman, who is a director of the University of Massachusetts and her Stonewall Center. So if you are kind of like you love reading through articles and resources, I definitely recommend you checking out this tiny URL, which is going to be in the chat. It's got all of our resources that Ethan, Brad, and Zach and I put together. We went through so many things to kind of curate some of the best resources out there for students, parents, teachers, and we're still building this, especially because, like the parent section is definitely going to be really small. We're still working through building this out. So thank you for your patience on that. I hope you find some really, really great resources. As far as paying for college, this tiny URL here, which Ethan will post in the chat as well, is a map to all of the LGBTQ centers within the United States at colleges and universities. I'm not saying stay away from Wyoming, right? Like, there's no centers there, but I'm saying that if a school has an LGBTQ center, you're going to have an army of people there really looking out for you. If you're at risk for homelessness, if you are experiencing some difficulties on campus, there is going to be a center there, a whole center that is going to help you solve and work through those challenges, helping you prepare for job interviews. If you are a non-binary person or a trans person, you're going to need a lot of support on how, what is that professionalism language look like, and how do you present yourself? These centers are going to really support you. And if you can attend a school that has a center like this, I would definitely recommend it. My college did not have a center. It was a very queer-friendly campus, but it did not have a center. So definitely don't rule out a school that doesn't have a center. I'm just saying, if it's really important to you, definitely use this tiny URL to help build that list. And then there's also a tiny URL with LGBTQ scholarships to help kind of fund your education. It's definitely an extensive list. But again, I would recommend being very, very good friends with your financial aid officer. It's going to help you if for whatever reason you experience homelessness throughout the course of your college experience. There's a way for you to apply for a professional judgment, which is the term professional judgment, where you can kind of get your financial aid reassessed to make up for the fact that you are now a student at risk of homelessness for the violence that you're facing at home for being queer. So again, the term is professional judgment. Every financial aid office within the United States knows what that term means, and it means that they have a subset of money set aside for emergency cases like that. In some states, it's much more difficult. I know California is a state that is very difficult. Many of their students face homelessness for just like the cost of living. And so it might change state to state, but there are opportunities, especially if you're facing violence at home. And here is kind of where Ethan will take it over. If you are still kind of like, I just want to know what schools I should look at, the Pride Index has a list of like, it gives schools ratings on how LGBTQ friendly they are. And when my students started exploring the Pride Index, the Campus Pride Index, they were so like, they were like, Miss, that's not on the Campus Pride Index. Like, I go to said school, and I could confirm or deny if they had great LGBTQ resources. Some of them I was very happy that they were not adding on their list, just based on what I knew about the campus. So definitely use the Campus Pride Index. They have great resources. I know Ethan did a podcast with Shane, who is over Campus Pride Index. So yeah, and when you're coming out to people, when you're thinking about who you want to come out to, it is okay to come out to your admissions officer, and just be very candid with them, build that relationship with them, let them know if you're going to be out to your family, but you definitely want to create that great relationship with them because they can connect you with all of the resources on their campus. And again, it's your choice. Like, to come out to them, it's completely up to you. But yeah, Ethan will let you know how you can do that if you decide that that's the route you want to go.
Awesome, thank you. So I want to do a quick screen share, and I want to show you, some of you are on this resource doc and some of you aren't yet, so I'm just going to reshare it in the chat box. So, because like 21 folks are, the rest of you, here's what's on this thing that we put together. So it's pretty epic, and I wanted to give you a sense of the epicness. So there's stuff on intersectionality, which I'm talking about briefly, familismo, tons of stuff on scholarships, building inclusive programming. This is more for folks on the college side. This resource that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Should I come out? If so, how? How to find school resources. A lot of these are from Campus Pride. And stuff for parents, and again, we're working on expanding that section. If you've got ideas and resources that you feel like could be useful here, please share them with us. We'll change this 50 to whatever number it ends up being at. We're probably way over 50 by this point. As I look at the numbers here, I see that we're way over it. And this is also a great thing.
I think it's like over 90 resources.
Well, we'll change this. We're going to totally overwhelm folks. But admissions counselors, if you've got folks that you feel like that would find this useful on the admission side, please send it to them. So anyway, just wanted to share that. All right, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if it is overwhelming, one thing that really helped me kind of go through all of those resources is just like every Monday or Wednesday, put some time on your calendar. 30 minutes is all you really need. To just like go through one resource at a time. You have to recommit to learning about this community. Like I said, language is evolving, resources are evolving. So you have to really commit to being an ally and advocate for this community.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just someone asked for the Shane Winmeyer podcast. So I'm sending that real quick. There we go. All right. So here's an essay that I love by a student who decided to come out. I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to take 3 minutes to do it because it's just, I'll explain why you'll see in 3 minutes. I am Mexican. The sound of frying empanadas and the smell of burning peppers. My mother calling me mi vida and my relatives kissing my cheek. Running but never hiding from the dreaded chancla and always responding with muy bien, ¿y tú? Childhood vacations to Puebla and Cancun, swimming in the ocean and playing in the sand. Feeling the need to be good at cross country. Feeling the need to be able to endure spicy, those are all me. I'm Chinese, the utter preference for using chopsticks in every scenario, and the unhealthy craving for rice with every meal. The sharing of every dish placed on the center turntable, hot pot for celebration, and tea eggs, of all things, as a favorite dish. My father's musical Cantonese conversations with my grandparents and their constant inquiry asking, how is school? Being named after the dragon for strength, and living for 3 years in Shanghai. The constant pressure to get good grades, my father's desire for me to become a doctor, and the never-ending, how are you so bad at math? You're Asian. Those are all me. I'm American, a citizen with the freedom to vote, the freedom to speak my mind and the representation by all cultures and countries of the world. Shopping sprees at Target and a constant diet of fast foods, full acceptance of the consumer society, and a rather unhealthy addiction to social media and technology, going to football games on Friday nights and watching Netflix on Saturday nights, always watching my weight, always looking at others, always wishing, always wanting for more. Those are all me. I'm Catholic. Sunday mornings always spent at church, the private Catholic middle and high schools, each with masses for special occasions, baptism, Eucharist, and confirmation, praying before each meal and saying, "Go away in the name of Jesus," to nighttime horrors, theology classes, and realizing there's so much more to religion than faith, having something to believe in, questioning what you believe in, turning to God when I see the horrors in the world and getting no response. Those are all me. I am homosexual, an unusual obsession with fashion and clothing, watching Game of Thrones not for Daenerys or Cersei, but for Jon Snow and Jaime, seeing Love, Simon for the first time and crying at least 5 times, always conscious, always thinking before talking, going to an all-boys school, dealing with gay being the go-to expression for displeasure, being called a faggot when I act gay, fear of my parents finding out. Those are all me. I am Jonathan K. Lung Eng. I love reading and am addicted to fan fiction. I have 3 siblings and love my 2 dogs more than anything in the world. I can't eat spicy food, and I have the biggest sweet tooth. I play League of Legends and soccer. I'm a Marvel geek and theater nerd. My friends call me Jenga. My teammates call me Jeng. My teachers call me Mr. Eng. I am Mexican. I am Chinese. I am American. I am Catholic. I am gay. I am all of this and more, and most of all, I am me. My identity is not a singular identity, but a conglomeration of experiences, beliefs, and origins. This is my identity. This is me. So there's so much. This is like a masterclass to me in personal statement writing. Just so many beautiful details. Yen was talking about intersectionality. That's what we're talking about here. I'm all these parts of me. This is, I would say, a strategy for students who find that identifying as queer or, LGBTQ, that's one part, and you don't want it to be a huge part of your essay. You kind of want it to be one chapter. This is one way to do it. It's to use what are some different identities that you connect with and that you're a part of. And notice the way this author uses the 5 senses: smell, taste, hearing. In this first paragraph, even the frying empanadas, the smell of burning peppers, to awaken that identity and what that represents for the student. Here are 4 qualities that I look for in a personal statement, and that you can begin to think about as you're thinking about what is your deepest story, and do you want to come out in your college essay or make a coming out story as part of it. So I look for core values: insight, vulnerability, and craft. And in this essay, you can see the core values I've got them listed here: culture, family, faith, intellectual curiosity, social justice, and so much more. You've got insight. Insight is like, are you saying something that surprises us, right? Or is there something that you say that is like, oh, I wouldn't have thought to maybe say it that way. So there's the student's awareness of being a product of American culture. So full acceptance of the consumer society and the addiction to social media and technology. And then there's also this awareness that you can have contrasting truths to exist simultaneously, like believing in something, but also questioning the thing that you believe in. That's really nice. That's a big thing that colleges are looking for. And then vulnerability. I mean, there's so much vulnerability throughout here, from the discussion of weight to, the being, fear of my parents finding out. And one thing I like to say is you don't have to be level 10 vulnerable. If you want to get to level 6, 7, or 8, that's totally fine. And then craft is just revising your essay over several, drafts so that we really see that you've chosen these details. And there's so many beautifully crafted moments. By craft, usually I mean finding a thing, saying a thing in a particular way that pops. And another way that I put this is you could, the student could have just said, I'm Mexican, and my whole family's Mexican, and kind of, I say in tennis, that's kind of just hitting the ball over the net. You kind of want to put some spin on it. And by that, I mean, you want to kind of say it in a way that we might not expect. So what is your version of identification with Mexican culture, or whatever that thing is for you, for this particular style of essay? So this style of essay is one that doesn't necessarily involve telling a story about overcoming a challenge. I would call this more of a montage. And the different scenes, each different paragraph shows a different side to the student. But it's not the only way to do this. Here's another one. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of tell you about it. Here's a student who talks about, identifying as Persian. Persian culture is great, and here are some specific details. But most of us have learned what being Persian means from our elders. And she talks about some of these, this violence and microaggressions she experienced, maybe not even micro for in her world. Girl, don't study biology, just marry a Persian guy, cook us food, clean the house, we'll take care of you. So here's another example of that familismo, where like not conflicting, but identities kind of overlap and create tensions in her life, and how that has, been present in her life. So she kind of sets up the challenge. So this is a different way to write your essay. It's like you could set up, here are challenges that I faced as a result of a way that I identify. She talks about Persian summer camp. And in her essay, she says, there are other examples of this sort of, basically LGBTQ bias. Outing myself, however, isn't an option. So to this day, I keep my mouth shut and pretend not to hear the homophobia. And then as she talks about later in the essay, other identities. So she talks about biology and her love of science. This led her to create the Women in STEM Club and receiving positive feedback, and pushing against some of these assumptions about women. In my lifetime, she says here at the end, I'll see a Persian culture that respects its female doctors, and I want to be part of that. I'm not positive I'll see a Persian culture that accepts same-sex marriage or supports transgender rights, but I might see one that recognizes LGBTQ existence. I get lost in the dream where I bring my non-existent girlfriend. So she brings her humor too. That's another thing that I really love about both these essays, is they're really bringing their humor. I bring my girlfriend to one of our infamous Persian parties and everyone's okay with it. But the expectation for me to marry a nice Persian man and have a big Persian wedding also haunts me. So what's nice here is that she doesn't kind of wrap it up like I've come out and things are all good. She's addressing that complexity and that nuance even towards the end of the essay, which creates, I think, a more complex ending. Check this out. Worries partially aside, I've come to a conclusion, literally in this essay. Again, that humor. If I can come out to a college admissions board and not fear rejection, then I should stop fearing rejection from my community. I'm done agonizing over the hypothetical. It's about time I begin existing as who I am and fight back against intolerance. There's only so much progress that even I, the Persian bisexual feminist that I am, can make from inside a closet. So you can hear she's like right on the verge here. And this isn't like a student who's like out and proud and being an activist. She's still kind of wrestling with it, but she addresses, her essay is told, demonstrating some of these qualities that I just mentioned, right? Values. We can see some of her core values for social justice, family, culture. These are all things that are important to her. There are insights in this essay. It's really well crafted, and it's definitely vulnerable, right? She's coming out in this essay and letting the reader know that she's like, I'm telling you something that my family doesn't even know about me. So there's another structure here that there's an exercise. If you face challenges relating to your identity, there's an exercise called the feelings and needs exercise, which I'm just going to paste this here in the chat box so you can grab this if you want. And you'll see a little link to an exercise that walks through like 6 different questions that you can ask to help you brainstorm this type of essay. So this is an exercise that she walked through, and it helped her figure out what her story was. But by the way, it wasn't like she wrote this in 2 drafts. Both of these essays underwent a bunch of drafts. And then finally, here's an essay by a student who, again, faced challenges. So, early on in his life, in one of his favorite outfits was a bright purple shirt with dark purple jeans. Classmates saw me, they would giggle and ask why I was dressed like that. I love my clothes. I always felt embarrassed. My mom would tell me I shouldn't wear things like that if I wanted to fit in. I was aware my clothes weren't the problem. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. It was that I was Black, that my mannerisms were too feminine, that my voice wasn't deep enough. The list of things about me classmates perceived as strange was long. So again, the challenge is clearly established. Desperate to fit in, here's what he did about it. I joined a mostly white, mean-spirited friend group who, I'll just fast forward, ended up making fun of a friend, calling her ghetto. And then this was a moment, the student stood up and said, I stood up, looked Camille in the eyes and said, you're a bully. I believe this to be the moment when I became an activist. I knew all too well how it felt to be made a stranger in my own community. The next day, Camille, who regrettably I told was gay, outed me. For the rest of the year, people mocked me in quote unquote gay voices, whispered behind my back. So the student decides to leave the school, goes to a new school and started joining clubs, the Black Activism Club, our Gay Straight Alliance, starts to, create, and then he said, I wanted to create not just a Black group, which is by nature exclusionary, but a community of diverse students that would support its members and better our broader community. And so he formed the People of Color Club. As founder, I organized an assembly on microaggressions. I'm fast forwarding a little bit. After the presentation, teachers came up, they thanked them. I felt excited knowing I was getting the community talking. It's a safe space for students of color, the People of Color Club, but also a group dedicated to community involvement. We've sorted and packed hundreds of boxes at local food pantries, and we're working on establishing relations with local homeless women's shelters. I believe the constant bullying I dealt with growing up was necessary for me to develop the empathy that activism requires. What? That phrasing, that's like craft, vulnerability, insight, all in one. I want to read that again. I believe the constant bullying I dealt with growing up was necessary for me to develop the empathy that activism requires. That makes me cry. Just the phrasing there. And what's interesting is like, that's something that other students say in their essays, but there's something about the way the student has like spent some time thinking about, how do I say this in a way that really captures this for me? It just, despite everything, I never attempted to hide myself or to change. I took refuge in my favorite works of literature. Books like I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings and On the Road planted in me the knowledge that freedom is out there and that unabashed self-love and resilience are the roadmap. Look at those values: self-love, resilience. As both a writer and an activist, I want to do for others what Maya Angelou did for me. I want the lonely queer kid who can't keep a friend to pick up my book and say, he lives freely and without fear of judgment. Perhaps there is hope for me. So simple structure, challenges that I've faced and their impact, what I've done about it, and what I've learned through this experience. Now, there's another structure that I talk about on this little thing that I've linked in the chat box, which is like, what is the status quo? Which is to say, how did things start out for you? So here was the status quo. I was, bullied basically growing up. And then I witnessed a bullying moment, and then I interrupted it and stood up. And that for the student was the inciting incident, the moment when things really changed. The raising of the stakes. So this is like the moment that makes things even more intense. The student gets outed. People start bullying. And now the bullying turns to him. So what does he do? He leaves. Turning point, right? He decided to leave that school and then gets involved in all these clubs, builds on his activism, becomes an activist. And the new status quo is here, that now the student is sort of looking back and is grateful for some of these experiences. Now, I didn't share this essay first because I want students to know that like, there's so many ways to do this, right? And there's a blog, if you click the link at the top, if you just Google coming out college essay guy, you'll see some more examples of these. But there's so many ways to do this. Like this last student, yes, is an activist, but the first student, not necessarily, or we don't know because it's just one chapter in the essay, right? The second student is really just starting to come out. And so this is my triple life was sort of like an ode to the different, intersectional identities that she was talking about in the essay. Anyway, my point here is that there's so many different ways to do this. If this is something that it's on your heart and you're feeling like, I might want to come out in my essay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second. I encourage you to like do the feelings and needs exercise to see if there's something there in terms of challenges, but know that it can only be if you want just one part of you. It could be something that you mention in like one sentence. There are so many ways to like, to weave identity into your college essay.